It was one of those afternoons that leaves a bitter taste that just will not go away, the kind of result that makes everything feel heavier than it should at this stage of the season. Celtic walked into Tannadice knowing exactly what was at stake, fully aware that every single point now carries enormous weight. And yet what unfolded on that pitch was a performance that never truly matched the urgency of the moment. This was not just another defeat. It was the kind that shifts momentum, the kind that hands belief to your rivals and plants serious doubt in your own path forward. From the very beginning, there was a strange lack of edge about Celtic's approach. The ball moved, possession was there, and on the surface it might have looked like control, but there was something missing in the details that actually win you football matches. The sharpness in the final third, the aggression in duels, the hunger to impose themselves on the game, it all felt slightly off. You could sense that the team was trying to settle into a rhythm, but that rhythm never truly arrived, and instead it became a slow, frustrating build that never really threatened to break Dundee United down in any meaningful way. Even in moments where Celtic found space and worked the ball into promising areas, the final decision repeatedly let them down. Passes were either overhit or delayed, runs were not matched with the right delivery, and when chances did appear, they were not taken with the conviction you would expect from a side chasing the title. It created this feeling that the game was there to be taken, but no one was willing, or perhaps able, to grab it and turn it in Celtic's favor. It was not a complete collapse early on, but it was far from convincing, and against a team willing to fight for every second ball, that hesitation becomes costly. The conditions certainly played their part, but not in a way that should excuse what happened. This was a surface that demanded adaptation, demanded a more direct and aggressive approach, yet Celtic continued at times to play as if they were on a perfect pitch. There was a clear disconnect between what the game required and how the team responded to it. A side with real title ambitions has to recognize those moments and adjust accordingly, and that adjustment simply did not come. Instead, Dundee United looked far more comfortable dealing with what was in front of them, showing a willingness to battle that Celtic struggled to match. As the first half went on, there were glimpses of hope, small signs that maybe Celtic could find a way through. A couple of opportunities came and went, and for a brief period it felt like one goal might be enough to settle everything. There was that sense that it might not be pretty, that it might take a scrappy finish or a moment of persistence, but that somehow Celtic would edge their way to a result. That belief, however, was built on very little substance, and as the game wore on, it became increasingly clear that it was more hope than expectation. Then came the turning point, and it arrived in a way that has become all too familiar. The second half began with a lack of concentration, a drop in intensity, and suddenly Celtic found themselves chasing the game. Conceding once was bad enough, but the reaction to going behind was even more concerning. Instead of a response filled with urgency and determination, what followed was hesitation, misplaced passes, and a team that looked unsure of how to get back into the match. When the second goal went in shortly after, it felt less like a shock and more like the inevitable consequence of everything that had been building. What stood out most was not just the scoreline, but the absence of a real fight back. Teams chasing a title, teams with belief, they throw everything forward in those moments. They create chaos, they force mistakes, they make the opposition uncomfortable. Celtic did none of that. The attack lacked cohesion, the midfield failed to drive the team forward, and the overall structure seemed to fall apart under pressure. It was as if the game was slipping away and no one on the pitch could quite figure out how to stop it. There were moments that summed it all up perfectly. Passages of play where simple actions turned into confusion, where communication broke down and composure disappeared. Balls were played into areas with no clear target, players found themselves out of position, and Dundee United began to look more likely to extend their lead than Celtic did to reduce it. That is the most worrying aspect of all, not just losing control, but looking completely detached from the idea of regaining it. Individually, there were performances that raised serious questions, not necessarily because of isolated mistakes, but because of a consistent lack of impact. In games like this, you need players to step up, to take responsibility, to impose themselves even when things are not going your way. Instead, too many went missing, too many lost their battles, and too many seemed unable to influence the game in any meaningful way. It created a situation where the collective effort simply was not enough, and when that happens, results like this become almost unavoidable. And perhaps the most frustrating part is that this is not an isolated incident. This has been a recurring theme, especially away from home, where Celtic have struggled to impose themselves, struggled to create consistently, and struggled to show the resilience needed to grind out results when the football is not flowing. At this stage of the season, those weaknesses become magnified, and every slip carries far greater consequences than it would earlier in the campaign. As the final whistle approached, there was a sense of inevitability about it all. The energy had drained, the belief had faded, and what remained was a performance that will be looked back on as a major missed opportunity. Not just because of the points dropped, but because of what it represents in the context of the title race, where margins are tight and moments like this can define everything that comes next. What makes this result even harder to accept is the timing of it, because just when it felt like there was a shift in momentum, just when there was a growing sense that Celtic might be finding a way to push through the difficult moments, everything seemed to unravel again. There had been signs of resilience in recent matches, moments where the team managed to grind out results without necessarily playing well, and that is often what defines champions over the course of a long season. But here, on a day where that same resilience was required more than ever, it was nowhere to be found. The reaction after going behind is what will frustrate supporters the most, because it did not resemble a team fully aware of what was on the line. There was no sustained pressure, no wave of attacks forcing Dundee United deeper and deeper, no sense of panic in the opposition. Instead, Celtic looked disjointed, almost as if the belief drained out of them far too quickly. The passes became safer rather than braver, the movement off the ball slowed down, and the urgency that should define a title-chasing side simply never materialized. It raises serious questions about mentality, especially in high-pressure situations. This is the stage of the season where character becomes just as important as quality, where the ability to respond to setbacks can separate those who lift the trophy from those who fall short. What we saw here did not reflect a team ready to embrace that challenge. It looked more like a group caught between trying to play their natural game and struggling to adapt when that game was not working. There is also a growing concern around the lack of consistency within the squad, not just in terms of performances, but in terms of selection and cohesion. When changes are made so frequently, particularly in attacking areas, it becomes difficult to build any real understanding or rhythm. Partnerships never quite have the chance to develop, and players are often trying to find their footing in constantly shifting roles. In a match like this, that lack of familiarity becomes obvious, especially when quick decisions and instinctive movements are required. Some players, when introduced, looked like they were still trying to catch up with the pace and intensity of the game rather than influencing it. That is a dangerous position to be in when you are chasing a result, because every touch, every pass, every decision carries added pressure. Instead of lifting the level, those moments only seem to reinforce the disjointed nature of the performance, with attacks breaking down almost as quickly as they started. Defensively, there was a vulnerability that Dundee United were more than happy to exploit, not necessarily through moments of brilliance, but through organization, determination, and a willingness to commit bodies forward when opportunities arose. Celtic, on the other hand, looked uncertain, particularly when dealing with transitions. Once possession was lost, there was a hesitation in recovery, a lack of sharpness in closing down space, and that allowed the opposition to grow in confidence as the game progressed. As the minutes ticked away, the body language became more telling than anything else. Heads dropped, reactions slowed, and there was a visible frustration that did not translate into positive action. It is one thing to be disappointed, but it is another to let that disappointment affect your performance in real time. The best teams channel that emotion into urgency, into sharper play, into a refusal to accept the situation. That response just was not there. Looking beyond the 90 minutes, there is a wider issue that cannot be ignored, and that is the composition of the squad itself. With so many players either new to the environment or only temporarily part of the setup, there is a question about how deeply the responsibility is felt across the group. When the stakes are this high, you need players who are fully invested, who understand exactly what it means to win or lose in these moments. Without that, There is always a risk that performances will lack that final edge when it matters most. That is not to say there is a lack of effort across the board, but effort alone is not enough at this level, especially in a title race that demands near perfection. It is about intensity, concentration, and the ability to execute under pressure, and those elements have been inconsistent throughout the campaign. Matches like this only highlight those inconsistencies even more because they expose the gap between potential and actual delivery on the pitch. The frustration also comes from the knowledge that rivals are capitalizing on these moments. In a tightly contested race, every slip opens the door for others, and this was a door that did not need to be opened. The opportunity was there to build momentum, to apply pressure elsewhere, and instead the opposite has happened. Now, the margin for error becomes even smaller, and the pressure only increases with each passing game. What remains now is a situation where nothing less than a perfect response will do. There is no longer room for performances that fall short of the required standard, no space for slow starts or passive spells within matches. Every game from here on carries enormous weight, and the expectation is clear. The challenge is whether this group can rediscover the belief, the cohesion, and the intensity needed to rise to that level when it matters most. There is also a growing spotlight on the leadership within the team during moments like this, because when performances begin to drift, it is those voices on the pitch that are expected to pull everything back into line. In this match, that presence did not feel strong enough. There was no clear figure grabbing control, no one visibly demanding more from those around them, and that lack of authority allowed the game to continue slipping further away. In tight contests, especially under difficult conditions, leadership can often be the difference between collapse and recovery, and Celtic simply did not show enough of it when it mattered. Another element that cannot be ignored is how predictable the team became as the match unfolded. Dundee United seemed to read every phase of play, closing down spaces before Celtic could exploit them and forcing mistakes in key areas. When a side becomes that easy to anticipate, it makes the task of breaking through even more difficult. There was very little variation in approach, no real change in tempo or structure to disrupt the opposition, and that only made Celtic's job harder as frustration continued to build. What makes it even more concerning is that this was not about being outclassed by a superior side, but rather being outworked and outmaneuvered over the course of the game. That is something that will sting far more, because it points to issues that go beyond technical ability. It speaks to mindset, to preparation, and to how the team handles adversity when the game does not go according to plan. And in a title race where every detail matters, those are exactly the areas that have to improve immediately if there is to be any hope of turning things around in the matches that lie ahead. Before we proceed, subscribe to our channel and enable notifications to receive all exclusive news about Celtic FC. Don't miss any details about your favorite team. It's extremely important for Celtic FC fans. Whispers are gathering pace around Celtic manager Martin O'Neill and young wide man Sebastian Tounekti after reports of a heated exchange that's left the player out in the cold, at least for now. Sources close to the dressing room suggest the disagreement was far from a quiet word, with voices raised and tempers clearly frayed behind closed doors. It's being said that Tounekti, long viewed as a promising option on the flank, found himself at odds with O'Neill over tactical demands and his role within the side. While neither camp has come forward publicly, the sudden absence of the winger from first-team activities has only fueled speculation that something more serious has taken place. Inside the club, there's a sense this could be a test of authority. O'Neill, known for his no-nonsense approach, has never shied away from making big calls when discipline or unity is at stake. Dropping a young talent, particularly one with Tounekti's potential, would certainly send a message through the squad that no one is beyond reproach. At the same time, there are murmurs that this might not be a long-term exile. Some figures within the club are believed to be pushing for a resolution, arguing that the situation could yet be salvaged if cooler heads prevail. Football, after all, has a habit of turning conflict into motivation, especially for players eager to prove their worth. Still, the uncertainty lingers. Is this merely a temporary falling out, or the beginning of a deeper fracture between player and manager? For now, all that's certain is that Tounekti's absence has not gone unnoticed, and the rumor mill around Celtic Park is spinning faster by the hour, with supporters left to wonder what truly lies behind the scenes. Hello, fan. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, as it means a lot to Celtic FC. Also, share your opinion about the news in the comments below. See you in the next video.